The jungle stretched endlessly before the alien scouts, dense and dripping with moisture. Thick trees, tangled vines, and a canopy so dense that sunlight barely penetrated. To them, it seemed like an insignificant planet, nothing more than another green ball in the galaxy filled with simple, primitive life. Their ship hovered silently above the jungle, its cloaking device rendering it invisible to all earthly detection systems. It was just another routine mission for them. In and out, gather data, and report back. The leader of the alien scout team, tall and lean with sharp, angular features, stood at the edge of the landing ramp. His glowing yellow eyes scanned the jungle beneath. He felt a flicker of unease, though he quickly dismissed it. Earth was catalogued as a lower-level threat. The natives were known for their wars and squabbles, but nothing about them or their planet had ever warranted any real concern from the Galactic Union. It was assumed the jungles were uninhabited, just teeming with simple animals and insects, nothing more. The alien scouts moved efficiently, equipped with advanced suits that allowed them to glide silently through the trees. Their technology was beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Small drones zipped around them, scanning the area, mapping the terrain, and marking points of interest. The leader barked commands in their native tongue, a sharp, guttural language that echoed softly in the damp air. His team spread out, each member tasked with collecting biological samples, mapping the terrain, and observing any possible threats. Despite the humid heat, the aliens remained unaffected, their suits regulating their body temperature. Their advanced cloaking technology made them practically invisible to the naked eye. They moved with an arrogance that came from years of successful missions on countless planets. Earth was just another job to them, another primitive world waiting to be catalogued and conquered when the time came. Their mission was simple. Find out if the jungles were worth anything to their superiors. Resources, strategic locations, and the potential for colonization. They'd scouted planets before, some with far more hostile environments than Earth's. Nothing here seemed to pose a significant challenge. The jungle buzzed with life, birds chirped, insects hummed, and animals rustled in the undergrowth, but to the aliens, it was all background noise. One of the scouts bent down, carefully collecting a sample of soil, analyzing it through the advanced tech on his wrist. Numbers and symbols flashed across the screen, but the results were predictable. Primitive, organic matter. The planet was nothing special. Their leader, however, remained cautious. He didn't trust the jungle. Something about it felt off. He tapped a few buttons on his wrist and brought up the holographic display of the surrounding area. It showed no signs of human civilization for miles. No major cities, no military presence. But the jungle itself seemed to swallow everything, including any signals they might have been able to detect. It was as if the Earth itself had become a barrier. A mild curiosity, but nothing that seemed to pose a real threat. One of the younger scouts moved ahead, his confidence growing with each step. He had never encountered any real danger on a mission like this. To him, Earth was just a backwater planet. He stepped through the thick underbrush with ease, his movements swift and quiet. His sensors scanned the area constantly, always searching for anomalies, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Yet the jungle seemed to watch them. The further they ventured, the denser the trees became, the more tangled the vines. It was as if the land was trying to hide something. The leader's unease grew, though he refused to show it. They were superior beings. They had conquered harsher worlds than this. The drones whizzed past, charting every nook and cranny of the forest. Their readings confirmed what the scouts already believed: Earth was primitive. The natives, though technically advanced by their own standards, were nowhere near the technological capabilities of the Galactic Union. These humans had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea their world was already under surveillance. Still, there was something about this jungle. The leader signaled his team to slow down, his instincts kicking in. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't reckless either. He had survived long enough to know that underestimating an environment, even one as seemingly mundane as this, could lead to disaster. He adjusted the settings on his suit, enhancing his sensory capabilities. The sounds of the jungle sharpened, each insect buzz, each bird call, each rustle of leaves magnified in his ears. He could hear the beating wings of a bird 50 meters away. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was listening, watching. The jungle wasn't just full of animals and plants. There was something more. He waved his hand, signaling the team to stay alert. His eyes scanned the area around them, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The jungle was quiet, too quiet, and even though his sensors detected no life forms beyond the standard fauna, his gut told him otherwise. They moved forward cautiously, their pace slower now. Every step was measured, every sound analyzed. The leader kept his gaze sharp, searching for any sign of danger. Yet all he could see were the trees, the thick vines, and the occasional burst of movement from an animal scurrying away. Still, that feeling of being watched lingered. The jungle felt alive, and not in the way the data suggested. It felt sentient, aware. The leader didn't like it. He didn't trust this place. He clicked a button on his wrist, sending a signal back to the ship. It was time to finish the mission and return. They'd collected enough data, and the sooner they got out of this place, the better. Just as he was about to give the command to return, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, followed by silence. One of the scouts was down. The jungle was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The man crouched low beneath a thick canopy of leaves, blending into the surroundings. He moved with practiced precision, every step calculated. Years of training in the Special Air Service had honed his instincts. The jungle was his home, its dangers familiar. He had lived through worse conditions, fought in more hostile environments, and survived situations where most would have perished. Here, he felt in control. He wasn't supposed to be in this part of the world. His mission had been over a few days ago, but something had kept him in the area. The jungle called to him. Its wildness, its unpredictability, and the challenge it presented had always drawn him in. It wasn't just the lush beauty that captivated him, it was the way the jungle tested him. The heat, the constant threat of predators, the biting insects, and the unforgiving terrain. All of it reminded him why he had chosen this life. But today, something was different. The jungle felt off. His senses were on high alert. There was a tension in the air, something he couldn't quite place. The sounds were normal, the hum of insects, the distant calls of birds, and the rustling of leaves in the slight breeze, but something beneath it felt wrong. He trusted his gut. His instincts had kept him alive for this long, and he wasn't about to ignore them now. He paused, scanning the area around him. Nothing moved, but the feeling didn't go away. He wasn't alone here, not today. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the landscape ahead. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. It had started with small things. The sudden absence of birds in certain areas, the unnatural quiet that fell over specific sections of the jungle. He had come across odd tracks in the soil, footprints that didn't match any animal he knew of. They were too deliberate, too precise, as if they belonged to someone, or something, that wasn't native to this world. He had followed the tracks for a while, curious but cautious. They led deeper into the jungle, away from the known paths. Whoever, or whatever, had left them didn't seem to care about the natural dangers of the terrain. That alone made him suspicious. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his knife, the cool metal a comforting reminder that he wasn't helpless. He had dealt with all kinds of threats in the past, both human and otherwise. But this felt different, more calculated. Whoever was out there had technology far beyond anything he had encountered before. He wasn't dealing with ordinary poachers or a rogue military unit. This was something else entirely. He didn't know how long he had been tracking them, but the further he went, the clearer the signs became. Something had crashed, or landed, here, though there was no sign of wreckage. Only the faintest disruptions in the jungle floor gave any indication that something had touched down. The more he studied the area, the more he realized that whatever had landed was using technology far beyond Earth's capabilities. A soft rustle caught his attention. He dropped into a crouch, barely making a sound. His eyes tracked the movement through the dense foliage. He saw them. Creatures, but not like any he had ever seen before. They were tall, thin, and moved with a grace that was unnatural. Their skin shimmered slightly, blending into the background as if they were using some kind of advanced camouflage. He stayed still, watching. They were organized, methodical, not like a wild animal or even a trained human unit. Their movements were precise, controlled. He watched as they scanned the area, using devices that he couldn't recognize. It confirmed his suspicions. They were not from this world. He had heard rumors, stories passed around in dark corners about sightings, but he had never believed them. Until now. The creatures communicated in low, guttural sounds, their words foreign to him. He watched closely, studying their behavior. They didn't seem to notice him, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. He knew better than to underestimate an enemy, especially one he didn't understand. His mind raced through his options. He could retreat, wait for an opportunity to gather more intel. But something told him that this wasn't a situation where time was on his side. If they were here, they had a purpose, and it wasn't going to be good for anyone. He had to act, but he had to be smart about it. Rushing in blind would get him killed, and he wasn't about to let that happen. He crept forward, careful not to make a sound. His senses were heightened, every nerve in his body alert. He knew the jungle better than they did, and he was going to use that to his advantage. The dense foliage provided cover, and the uneven terrain made it easy to move undetected. He stayed low, watching as they continued their scans. They didn't seem concerned about their surroundings, their focus solely on their equipment and readings. That was their first mistake. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small device he had rigged together. It wasn't much, just a simple distraction, but it would be enough to buy him a few seconds. He set it up, positioning it in a way that would draw their attention away from his position. With one quick movement, he triggered the device and waited. The sound it made was faint, barely more than a rustle in the trees, but it was enough. The creatures turned, their attention shifting to the source of the noise. That was all he needed. He moved swiftly, silently, positioning himself behind a large tree. He watched as they spread out, their focus now on finding the source of the disturbance. They were cautious, but not cautious enough. He could see the gaps in their formation, the subtle weaknesses in their movements. They relied too much on their technology, and that made them predictable. He waited, patient, biding his time. This was his jungle, and they were trespassers. His grip tightened on his knife. He was ready. The jungle held its breath as the alien scouts moved in formation, their advanced technology buzzing softly as they scanned the area. They were efficient, relying on their gear to detect anything out of place, unaware of the human eyes watching their every move. Hidden deep in the foliage, the SAS expert had them exactly where he wanted them. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but his mind remained calm and focused. Years of jungle warfare had taught him the importance of patience. He studied their movements, noting the patterns, the way they fanned out just enough to cover ground but not so far as to lose sight of each other. Their technology gave them a false sense of security, making them believe they were untouchable. But tech only got you so far in the jungle. Here, it was about instincts, knowledge of the terrain, and using the environment to your advantage. He wasn't impressed by their gadgets. His first strike had to be precise. There was no room for error. If he revealed himself too soon or misjudged their reactions, it could mean death. But this was what he excelled at: ambush, surprise, hitting hard and disappearing before they even knew what had happened. He adjusted his grip on his weapon, waiting for the right moment. One of the aliens separated from the group, moving closer to the edge of the clearing. That was his target. He shifted silently through the underbrush, moving like a shadow. The jungle covered his approach, the sounds of the insects and birds masking any noise he might make. The alien was oblivious, focused entirely on its equipment, trusting in its sensors to keep it safe. In a flash, the expert struck. The alien didn't have time to react before it was taken down, a quick, efficient move. He didn't stay to admire his work. Before the others even realized something was wrong, he was already gone, slipping back into the jungle's embrace. The alien's body lay in the clearing, unnoticed for now, but it wouldn't take long before they found it. He moved quickly, repositioning himself. He had no interest in a prolonged fight. His goal was to disorient and confuse them, to make them question their every move. The jungle was vast, and he intended to use every inch of it to his advantage. He could already hear the quiet murmur of the aliens' voices as they noticed one of their own had fallen. Good. Let them panic. The remaining scouts converged, their movements sharper now, more alert. But it was too late. He had the upper hand. The jungle was his ally, and their tech was useless if they didn't know where to point it. He set another trap, something simple but effective. A thin wire strung between two trees, a classic jungle trick. As one of the scouts hurried forward, the wire caught its foot, sending it sprawling to the ground. A quick burst of movement from the expert, and another alien was down. The survivors were growing agitated. Their formation tightened, their movements more frantic. They were scanning wildly now, their earlier confidence eroding. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They were supposed to be the hunters, not the hunted. They hadn't expected to encounter anything like this. A human who knew the jungle better than their technology could ever comprehend. They were in over their heads, and they knew it. The SAS expert kept up the pressure, never allowing them a moment to regroup. He struck from different angles, never staying in one place for more than a few seconds. The jungle echoed with their frustrated cries, but they couldn't find him. Every time they thought they had a lock on his position, he was already gone. It was as if the jungle itself was protecting him. Another alien fell, this time to a cleverly placed pit trap, hidden beneath a layer of leaves. The expert watched from a distance, satisfied with the chaos he had sown. The once organized team was now in disarray, their advanced tech proving useless in the face of a foe who didn't play by their rules. The leader barked orders, trying to rally the remaining scouts, but fear had already taken root. The jungle was no longer just a backdrop for their mission. It had become their enemy. The thick trees, the endless vines, the oppressive humidity, it all seemed to close in on them. Every sound, every movement in the underbrush could be the human, ready to strike again. They were trapped, not by physical barriers, but by the very environment they had dismissed as primitive. The SAS expert could see it in their movements. They were scared, uncertain. That was exactly what he had wanted. Fear made you sloppy. Fear made you make mistakes. And mistakes were fatal in the jungle. He knew it, and now they were learning it the hard way. He paused for a moment, catching his breath. The aliens were on edge, their technology useless without clear targets. They were throwing everything they had at trying to locate him, but nothing worked. He could hear their scanners whirring, their voices growing more frantic. They were used to relying on their advanced gear to give them an edge, but it had failed them here. The jungle didn't care about their tech. It belonged to the expert, and he was using it to tear them apart. The leader of the scouts was the last one standing, his alien features twisted with frustration and fear. The SAS expert could see the alien's eyes darting around, scanning the trees, the ground, anywhere for a sign of where the next attack might come from. But the expert wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. With one final, calculated move, the expert made his approach. The alien's advanced weaponry fired wildly into the jungle, but it was too late. The SAS expert moved faster, quieter, and with deadly precision. In a blur of motion, he struck, taking down the leader in one swift, final blow. The jungle was silent again. The threat neutralized. The alien technology lay abandoned, useless in the face of human ingenuity and survival instinct. The SAS expert stood over the fallen leader, calm and composed. This had been their mistake. They had underestimated not just the jungle, but the people who lived and fought in it. Without another glance at the remains of the alien team, the expert melted back into the jungle, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The jungle swallowed him whole, its natural rhythm returning. The alien scouts had thought Earth's jungles were safe, but they had learned too late that this was far from the truth. The alien leader, now fully aware of the danger surrounding them, barked orders to the remaining scouts. Their once flawless formation had turned into scattered movements of panic and uncertainty. They were on the defensive now, and it was clear to anyone with experience that they were losing control. Their once reliable technology couldn't keep up with the unpredictability of the jungle, or the human who had turned it into his hunting ground. The remaining scouts activated more of their advanced gadgets, desperately trying to regain some advantage. Their sensors hummed, scanning for any sign of life beyond the usual jungle inhabitants, but the human was invisible to them. Their tech, so effective in open fields or barren landscapes, was being defeated by thick trees and dense undergrowth. Every tree, every vine seemed to work against them, blocking their sensors and muffling the sounds of their enemy. The leader's frustration grew as they struggled to maintain order. His once composed and confident demeanor was replaced by sharp movements and frantic decisions. He wasn't used to this kind of resistance. He had never expected a human, primitive by their standards, to systematically dismantle his team like this. Their training, their weapons, none of it mattered here. Meanwhile, the SAS expert kept moving, circling the area with precision, staying just out of reach. He watched as the alien team floundered, their every movement becoming more erratic. Fear was starting to cloud their judgment, and he knew it. The psychological pressure was mounting. The alien leader tried to regain control, but his commands were falling on ears filled with panic. The scouts could feel the weight of their own growing helplessness. The expert stayed hidden, conserving energy, allowing the aliens to wear themselves out. Every moment they spent firing blindly or running after shadows was another moment of wasted effort. He had them exactly where he wanted them, tired, scared, and easy to manipulate. The jungle was an unforgiving place, and he was using it to his advantage. He didn't need advanced technology to outsmart them. His weapons were the trees, the ground, the very air they were breathing. He let them run themselves ragged, always watching, always waiting. One of the scouts stumbled over a root, his fall punctuated by the sound of his equipment clattering to the ground. Another scout rushed to help him up, but in their disarray, they didn't notice the expertly laid trap that snapped shut around the injured scout's leg. The alien scream pierced the air, cutting through the buzzing insects and distant animal calls. The leader rushed to his side, trying to pull him free, but the damage was already done. The trap had severed enough muscle to make escape impossible for the injured scout. The SAS expert watched from a distance. Every step they took deeper into the jungle was another mistake, another opportunity for him to strike. The alien leader shouted in frustration, ripping the trap apart with sheer force, but it was too late for the injured scout. The team was now down another member, and the rest were starting to realize just how precarious their situation had become. Fear was turning into desperation. The remaining scouts began firing wildly into the trees, their weapons lighting up the dark canopy with flashes of energy. The air smelled of burned ozone as their weapons cut through the leaves and branches, but the jungle absorbed the blasts, leaving nothing but smoldering plants in their wake. They were trying to hit something they couldn't see, something they didn't understand. The SAS expert knew their tactics were getting sloppy. Panic was a weapon he used often, and now it was working perfectly in his favor. He could hear their breathing, their frantic movements. They were wasting energy, burning through their resources, and accomplishing nothing. He moved closer, knowing the time to strike was near. His years of experience had taught him that when the enemy panics, that's when they are most vulnerable. The alien leader seemed to sense this, too, but he couldn't control the spiral his team was falling into. He switched tactics, activating a device on his wrist that projected a protective field around the remaining scouts. It was a last-ditch effort, a shield against the invisible enemy they couldn't track. The alien leader's voice cut through the chaos, trying to rally his remaining men, but it was clear they were losing hope. Their technology was no longer enough. The shield wouldn't hold forever, and they knew it. The expert watched from the cover of the trees, studying the shield. He had seen this type of tech before, and he knew how to handle it. Shields were designed to stop direct attacks, but they couldn't protect against the environment itself. The jungle had no boundaries, no walls. He didn't need to attack them directly. He just needed to wait for the jungle to do what it did best, wear them down. Minutes passed. The air inside the shield was growing thick, the humidity rising. The alien suits, while advanced, weren't built for prolonged exposure in such a hostile environment. Sweat began to bead on their skin, their movements becoming slower, more labored. The expert could see the fatigue setting in. The jungle was doing its job. He made his move. With a quick motion, he tossed a series of small, simple devices into the foliage near the shield. They weren't weapons in the traditional sense, just distractions. A few small explosions echoed through the jungle, shaking the ground and causing the birds to scatter. The noise was deafening inside the shield, amplifying the already tense atmosphere. The alien scouts jumped, their eyes wide with fear as they scanned the area. The leader barked more orders, but the panic had already set in. They couldn't see where the explosions had come from. It felt like the jungle was closing in on them, alive with menace. They were trapped, surrounded by an unseen enemy and an unforgiving environment. That was when the expert struck. Moving with deadly precision, he took out the first scout with a quick, silent attack, his body blending seamlessly into the shadows of the trees. The scout never saw it coming. The second scout fell moments later, taken down by another expertly placed trap. The alien leader turned just in time to see the last of his team fall, his face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and horror. The jungle was silent again. The alien leader stood alone now, his shield flickering as his suit struggled to maintain power. He knew it was over. The human had outsmarted them, using nothing but the jungle and his own survival skills. All their technology, their advanced tactics, had been worthless here. The leader's eyes scanned the trees one last time, but he couldn't find the human. The SAS expert had vanished once more, disappearing into the jungle like a ghost. The alien leader stood alone, his breathing heavy, eyes scanning the jungle. The shield around him flickered, its energy source draining faster than he could manage. The bodies of his fallen team littered the ground, reminders of their arrogance and the unfamiliarity of this hostile world. Every bit of technology they had brought with them now felt useless, no match for the environment or the deadly precision of their unseen enemy. He had never felt this vulnerable. On countless planets, he had led successful missions, outsmarted enemies, and conquered landscapes much harsher than this. But here, on this seemingly insignificant planet, everything had gone wrong. His advanced equipment had been outmatched by simple, brutal tactics, by a native who knew how to turn the land itself into a weapon. The jungle had become his prison, and he could feel it closing in around him. His mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, some strategy to turn the situation back in his favor. But every plan seemed futile now. The human was out there, somewhere, moving silently, watching him, waiting. The alien leader knew he was being hunted, and that realization gnawed at him. He had never been the prey before. Now, every shadow, every rustle of the leaves felt like a threat. The jungle had grown darker, the trees towering above like silent witnesses to his failure. He activated one last device, a small drone meant to map out his immediate surroundings. It buzzed into the air, its scanners sweeping the area. He hoped it would give him a glimpse of the human, something to give him an advantage. But the jungle's dense foliage and towering trees rendered the drone nearly useless, the readings distorted, blurred. The human remained hidden, invisible. Panic started to creep in. The leader's thoughts were clouded by fear, and fear was a dangerous thing in battle. He knew it, had seen it many times in enemies he had faced. But now, he was the one losing control. His breathing became shallow, heart racing as the quiet around him pressed in tighter. He tried to calm himself, but the quiet only made the tension worse. This wasn't a battleground he understood. The human didn't fight like any enemy he had encountered before. This was something primal, something he couldn't outthink or outtech. His shield flickered again, and this time it sputtered out completely. The protective barrier vanished, leaving him fully exposed. He was vulnerable now, just another target in the jungle, and he knew it. He clutched his weapon tighter, his eyes darting from tree to tree, trying to anticipate the human's next move. His weapon hummed softly, charged and ready, but it felt inadequate. For the first time, he felt powerless. Then there was movement, a brief blur in the corner of his vision. He spun, firing his weapon blindly into the trees, but hit nothing. The jungle absorbed the blasts, the energy dissipating harmlessly into the thick greenery. The human was playing with him now, testing his reactions, wearing him down. He could feel the weight of his own exhaustion pulling at him. Every move, every breath took more effort than it should. The leader stumbled backward, trying to put space between himself and whatever unseen danger was out there. His mind raced with calculations, but none of them mattered now. He couldn't outthink the human. He had to survive, somehow. But the jungle didn't offer him any help. The trees, the vines, the very ground beneath him felt like an enemy. He was trapped. A sharp sound cut through the air, a sudden crack of a branch. The alien leader's head snapped toward the noise, his weapon raised. His hands shook slightly, betraying his fear. He fired again, another burst of energy disappearing into the jungle with no effect. He was wasting his last resources, and he knew it. The human struck. The attack was swift, precise, and devastating. The alien leader barely had time to react. One moment he was alone, standing in the clearing, and the next, the human was upon him, a blur of movement and lethal intent. The alien stumbled, the force of the blows sending him to the ground. His weapon slipped from his grasp, landing somewhere in the underbrush. For a moment, everything was silent. The alien leader lay there, staring up at the canopy, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Pain shot through his body, but it was more than just physical pain. It was the realization that he had lost. He had been outmatched, outmaneuvered, and outsmarted by a native of this primitive planet. The human stood over him, calm and composed, like a shadow that had emerged from the very heart of the jungle. There was no need for words. The alien leader understood, in that moment, the fundamental mistake he and his team had made. They had underestimated this world and its people. They had assumed superiority based on their technology, their experience, their advanced weapons. But none of that mattered here. Here, survival wasn't about what you had, it was about what you knew. And the human knew this jungle better than they ever could. The alien leader's vision began to blur as consciousness slipped away. The jungle seemed to close in around him, its shadows deepening, the sounds of life fading into a distant hum. His last thought was one of bitter regret. They had come to this planet thinking they were the hunters, but they had been wrong. The jungle had its own protector, and they had been the prey all along. As the leader's breathing slowed, the human disappeared back into the jungle, as silently as he had appeared. There was no need to linger. The threat was gone, and the jungle was once again at peace. The alien mission was over.